in which millions of human beings still go hungry, where sustainable development is always threatened, in which governance institutions still reflect the reality of the middle of the last century. We will only be able to face all these problems if we address the issue of inequality. Inequality of income, access to health care, education, food, gender and race, and also of representation is at the origin of all these anomalies. If we want to make a difference, we have to place reducing inequalities at the core of the international agenda. Therefore, the Brazilian presidency of the G20 has three priorities. The first one is social inclusion and fight against hunger, energy transition, and sustainable development in its three aspects: the vector social, the economic, and environmental vector. And thirdly, the reform of global governance institutions. All these priorities are part of the Brazilian presidency motto, which says, building a fair world and a sustainable planet. Two task forces will be created: the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, and the Global Mobilization Against Climate Change. We need to redouble our efforts to achieve the goal of ending world hunger by 2030. Otherwise, we will be facing the biggest multilateral failure in recent years. Acting to fight climate change requires political will and determination from the rulers, as well as resources and technology transfer. We want greater participation of the emerging countries in the decision-making process of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The unbearable foreign debt of the poorest countries needs to be addressed. The WTO must be revitalized, and its dispute settlement system must start working again. To regain its political strength, the UN Security Council needs to count on the presence of new developing countries among its permanent and non-permanent members. The international community looks at us with hope because we bring together economies from emerging countries and developed countries in the G20. We represent 80% of the global GDP, 75% of exports, and around 60% of the world's population. To ensure that the G20 acts in an inclusive and coherent manner, Brazil intends to organize work around three general guidelines. First, we will make the political and financial paths
conjunta nos permitiu enfrentar os momentos mais críticos, mas foi insuficiente para corrigir os equívocos estruturais do neoliberalismo. A arquitetura financeira global mudou pouco e as bases de uma nova se tratarmos da questão da desigualdade. A desigualdade de renda, de acesso à saúde, de educação, de alimentação, de gênero, de raça e de representação está na origem de todas essas anomalias. Se quisermos fazer a diferença, temos que colocar a redução das desigualdades no centro da agenda internacional. Por isso, a presidência brasileira do G20 tem três prioridades: a inclusão social e o combate à fome, a transição energética e o desenvolvimento sustentável em três vertentes: a vertente social, a vertente econômica e a vertente ambiental. Terceiro, a reforma das instituições de governança global. Todas essas prioridades estão contidas no lema da presidência brasileira, que diz: construindo um mundo justo e acordarmos a melhor política pública se não alocarmos os recursos necessários para a sua implementação. Segundo, nós temos de ouvir a sociedade. Não existe governo sem sociedade. De engajamento tem a oportunidade de reportar suas conclusões e recomendações aos representantes do governo. Terceiro, nós não podemos deixar que questões geopolíticas sequestrem a agenda de discussões das várias instâncias do G20. Não nos interessa um G20 dividido. Só com uma ação conjunta é que podemos fazer o desafio dos nossos dias. Precisamos de paz e cooperação em vez de conflito. O caminho que nos levará de Rio de Janeiro exigirá de todos muita dedicação e empenho. Os grupos técnicos e as reuniões ministeriais preparatórias serão sediadas em várias cidades de todas as 5 regiões do nosso país. Por isso, nós acolheremos os integrantes do G20 de braços abertos e precisamos efetivamente do apoio de todas as pessoas, inclusive a experiência dessa bem-sucedida cúpula feita no nosso querido país, que é a Índia. Terei a honra de receber todos vocês na cúpula do Rio de Janeiro em novembro de 2024. E quero, antes de bater o martelo, eu quero agradecer ao presidente Modi e agradecer ao povo indiano pela competência da organização. E eu quero lhe dizer, presidente Modi, que eu, particularmente, fico muito emocionado quando estou numa homenagem ao nosso querido Gandhi. Todo mundo sabe que na minha vida política, Mahatma Gandhi tem muito significado, porque a luta pela não violência é um exemplo que durante muitas décadas eu segui quando estava no movimento sindical. E por isso eu fiquei emocionado. Quero agradecer a oportunidade de ter ido prestar homenagem ao Gandhi e quero dizer a todos vocês que o Brasil assumirá o G20 e vamos fazer um esforço muito grande para conseguirmos fazer pelo menos igual os companheiros da Índia fizeram. Muito obrigado.
Your Highnesses, Excellencies, जैसा आप सब जानते हैं, भारत के पास नवंबर तक G20 प्रेसिडेंसी की भी जिम्मेदारी है। अभी 2.5 महीने बाकी हैं। इन 2 दिनों में आप सभी ने अनेक बातें यहां रखी हैं, सुझाव दिए हैं, बहुत सारे प्रस्ताव रखे हैं। हमारी ये जिम्मेदारी है कि जो सुझाव आए हैं उनको भी एक बार गति कैसे लाई जा सकती है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि हम नवंबर के अंत में G20 का एक वर्चुअल सेशन और रखें। उस सेशन में हम इस समिट के दौरान तय विषयों की समीक्षा कर सकते हैं। इन सब की डिटेल्स हमारी टीम आप सभी के साथ शेयर करेगी। मैं उम्मीद करता हूं कि आप सब इससे जुड़ेंगे। योर हाइनेसेस, एक्सेलेंसीज, इसी के साथ मैं G20 समिट के समापन की घोषणा करता हूं। वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर का रोड मैप सुखद हो। स्वस्ति अस्तु विश्वस्य यानी संपूर्ण विश्व में आशा और शांति का संचार हो। 140 करोड़ भारतीयों की इसी मंगल कामना के साथ आप सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
उधर जाइए, अमिताभ बच्चन जी हैं वहाँ। अरे उधर जाइए, शाहरुख खान सुपरस्टार। अब सुपरस्टार से भी ऊपर स्टार हैं उधर। देश की धड़कन है वो, देश की धड़कन। उधर जाइए, उधर। हैदराबादी बिरयानी वेटिंग सर। लखनवी बिरयानी वेटिंग सर। आलिया घर बुलाए जल्दी। एवरेस्ट शाही बिरयानी मसाला।
I'm a new politician. I'm just starting as a politician. Modi ji, what advice would you give me? And Modi ji said, Thanedar ji, just be yourself. I lived most of my life in poverty in Belgaum. I got an admission for a PhD program in US. I needed to get that visa, student visa, so I can go to America. After the interview was concluded, she put a stamp on those papers, rejected. That day, I just collapsed on the ground. She rejected second time. She rejected my visa for the third time. And she rejected that for the fourth time. Now, I sit on the Homeland Security Committee, and I'm in charge protecting America's borders. America remains the number one economic power in the world, but India is fast approaching. In a decade or so, we're going to see America, China, and India. These are the three economic superpowers. America needs India because China is very aggressive. America needs to realize that India needs to be respected. India needs to be treated on an equal basis. And that's what the basis has to be for a really strong relationship. US has made mistakes too. Its relationship with Pakistan. And I think that made India stay away a little bit. Media always portrays America being rich and, not all America is Hollywood. My children were 4 and 8 years old. I have 2 boys. And their mother, my first wife, committed suicide. We lost her. Few years went by, I met Shashi. Neil was 11 years old then. He took out a cake, and on the cake he wrote, "Welcome home, Mom."
Namaste, Jai Hind. Today's podcast is a rags to riches story. It's about India-US relations. It's about a story of a first-generation immigrant who made it in the US. There are thousands of people of Indian origin who are at the top of the pyramid in the US. My guest today has not just a rags to riches story, but an inspiring one. It hasn't been an easy life by any yardstick. Shri Thanedar is a representative from Michigan's 13th Congressional District since 2023. In India recently, Shri Thanedar was part of a powerful bipartisan American congressional delegation led by House of Representatives India and Indian Americans, caucus co-chairs Ro Khanna and Michael Waltz. They were part of the Indian Independence Day celebrations at the Red Fort and also got to meet Prime Minister Modi. The delegation also went to Mumbai, where they met corporate leaders, spent time understanding India's digital public infrastructure, visited the Western Naval Command, and met figures from Bollywood. Thank you for being part of the podcast, Congressman Thanedar. But before I begin the podcast, एक सूचना कि जब मैं कांग्रेसमैन थानेदार कहती हूँ, उन दर्शकों के लिए, उन सुनने वालों के लिए जो यूएस कांग्रेस के बारे में या यूएस पॉलिटिक्स के बारे में ज़्यादा ना जानते हों, कांग्रेसमैन थानेदार का इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस के साथ कोई रिश्ता नहीं, कोई ताल्लुकात नहीं है. दरअसल द यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स कांग्रेस इज द लेजिस्लेटिव और लॉ मेकिंग ब्रांच ऑफ द यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स गवर्नमेंट एंड श्री थानेदार इज पार्ट ऑफ दैट. यानी कि जब मैं कांग्रेसमैन थानेदार कहती हूँ तो इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि थानेदार जी का कांग्रेस पार्टी यानी इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस के साथ कोई रिश्ता या ताल्लुकात हो. Now that I've got that out of the way, Congressman Thanedar, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Very happy that you're here, and just before you're about to fly out back home. So you've just had a meeting today when we are recording on the day that you've had a meeting with Prime Minister Modi. So could you tell me a little bit, or could you tell our viewers, our listeners, as to what that meeting was about and how did it go?
Oh, the meeting went very well. Modi ji, of course, spoke to me about my hometown, Belgavi. He said, when are you going to Belgaum? He and I met in Washington, D.C. Actually, I had the pleasure to escort him when he was to address the joint session of United States Congress.
This year?
This year.
Oh, okay.
So when Modi ji came,
Okay.
So I was with him. I brought him into the chamber of U.S. Congress where he did this great speech. His speech was so well received, both by the Democrats and the Republicans, that he got more standing ovations by both sides than any other head of state.
Okay. Right. And today's meeting?
Today's meeting was very cordial. It was not a very formal meeting.
Okay.
It was more about, he was joking, he was telling stories,
Okay.
And with me were there 7 other Congress members. And the agenda wasn't so much about specific issues.
Okay.
We talked about specific issues with Commerce Minister. We went to the Defense Ministry. We went to the External Affairs Minister. So a lot of the details were all worked out with